So today in Internet Economy, we're discussing Anthropic, that is the company behind Claude, as you may already know. They recently launched a new model called Mythos, and internally they're calling it one of the most powerful systems they've ever built. It's so powerful they're even scared of what it might become, and that is why they've refused to make it public just yet. They're only giving access to a select number of companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and a few others. And even those companies are using it under very controlled setup. First of all, what this Mythos thing does is very interesting to me. Basically, Mythos can go into any software systems and find hidden bugs. Not just regular bugs, I'm talking about bugs that nobody knows exist yet. I mean, bugs that have been sitting there for years and even decades even without being noticed. Mythos can actually go in and fish them out. For context, Mythos found a 27-year-old bug in OpenBSD. OpenBSD is known to be one of the most secure software systems in the world. Mythos also found a 16-year-old bug in FFmpeg. FFmpeg is the software that almost every app uses to play videos. Now, the bug was so well hidden that even automated testing tools that check that specific line of code millions of times never noticed the problem. Mythos was also able to create attacks for every major web browser possible. In one test, it wrote over 100, actually almost 200 working attacks for Firefox, compared to the previous models by Anthropic, which was only able to write about 2. And then it doesn't stop there, because it can take those bugs and turn them into working attacks. So let's say there's a flaw in your operating system or your browser. Mythos can find it, figure out how it works, and then use it to gain control. So let's say, for instance, a small bug in a browser usually crashes the tab, right? Mythos can turn that into a code execution and then link it to a weakness in the operating system and escalate that into full control of that device. That is bonkers. And according to Anthropic, Mythos has already done this across multiple major systems, from operating systems to web browsers and down to core internet software, like every one of them. It might seem as though such technology has existed before, and yeah, kind of, but Mythos is something like a different beast. How, you may ask? First of all, Mythos is finding thousands of bugs across completely different systems simultaneously. This is not a case of finding one or two issues like a researcher would spend weeks finding a single bug in something like a browser. What Mythos is doing is it will scan the browser engine, the memory layer, and even how it talks to the operating system, and then find multiple vulnerabilities across all of them, and then now chain them together into one working exploit. That is oh god, no. There's also the part where stuff that would normally take security researchers days or weeks would only take Mythos a couple hours, or at best overnight even. There's also the part where it does not exactly need you, like it doesn't need a human being. You can just give it a simple prompt and it goes off. It will run the test, figure things out by itself, and then comes back with actual results. So it very much behaves like an autonomous system, not just another tool. But then it starts to get a bit uncomfortable at some point, because the exact same thing that makes it useful, that makes it powerful, is also what makes it very risky. So like, if you're a company, you can use Mythos to find weaknesses in your systems and fix them before anything gets out of hand. But if you're on the other side, you can also likely use the exact same process to break into a company's system. That's what we would call dual use in tech. It is not a situation of two different tools. It is one system that can do both good and bad, depending on who is using it and the intent. So it lowers the barrier for whatever it is being used for better, for worse, basically. That is exactly why Anthropic is saying they cannot just release it publicly, because they think it is too risky right now. Internally, this model already crossed what they consider a safety threshold, where the potential for misuse is just too high. So instead of putting it out publicly, they decided to hold it back, at least for now. And that's a bit of a shift, if you ask me, because usually these companies, like in the case of Anthropic and OpenAI, always compete to release their most powerful models as quickly as possible. But as you can see, this is just the opposite. Rightfully so, I mean. So they're basically saying that this is so good, we don't even know how to control it just yet. Like, it's like a situation where something is so good it hurts. Like some of my favorite Taylor Swift songs, of course. So under Anthropic's internal policy, the one they call responsible scaling framework, this is exactly the kind of model you don't release publicly. It is the one you hold back until you're more confident you can control how it is used. But then really, to what extent can this be controlled? But I will give my opinion at the end of this video, so stay tuned. Before that, let's talk about the people that already have access to this technology. Anthropic has set up what they call Project Glasswing. So it's a thing where instead of releasing the model to the general public, they are giving access to a controlled group of organizations. These companies will use Mythos to test for defensive security. At the core, you have companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon AWS. Basically companies that run a large part of internet's infrastructure. You also have security and hardware companies like CrowdStrike, Palo Alto Networks, Nvidia, and Broadcom. And you also have financial institutions like JP Morgan Chase, and even open source companies like the Linux Foundation and the Apache Software Foundation. I hope I didn't butcher that. In total, we're looking at about 40 companies that have some level of access to Mythos. So while it is not public, it is also not just some small experiment. This is a coordinated effort to give a specific group of players a head start, just so you know what is actually coming. Also, very importantly, this is now beyond just tech, right? Governments are now already paying attention and getting involved. In the US, senior officials, including the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, actually convened major banks for discussions about this model. Their concerns are valid, of course, because if a system like this gets out into the wrong hands, it could be used to target critical infrastructure like financial systems or things that entire economies depend on. And it's not just the US even. Regulators in other countries are starting to have the same conversation, trying to understand what this kind of capability means for security at a national level. Again, it's no longer just tech. We're talking about a systemic risk situation here. Of course, they should be at alert. Everyone should be. Given Anthropic's recent form in the past few months of deploying jaw-dropping tech and models, I am in no doubt Mythos, if released publicly, would be a disruptor and cause major changes, good or bad. First of all, hacking would become so accessible. I mean, what do I mean by that? Before, finding and exploiting serious bugs or vulnerabilities took or would take a highly skilled team. It's going to take them a lot of time, a lot of effort. But now, one person with the right tool can potentially do the same thing at a much larger scale. However, if this gets into the wrong hands, you don't even want to experience what the outcome could be. We can see what's happening with the AI slop content everywhere these days. Now imagine the damage this, if available publicly, would wreak. It would be so much worse and so much more consequential. Also, there is always this window between when the bug is discovered and when it is fixed. That window would shrink with Mythos. It's going to shrink. So instead of weeks or months, you're now dealing with hours or days of fixing a bug or vulnerability. But remember, if defenders can find bugs faster, it means attackers can also move faster. Also importantly is that the whole idea of security starts to change. For a long time, a lot of systems were effectively secure because they were just maybe hard to break due to bugs being too buried, too complex, too time consuming to find. But if models like Mythos can systematically go through software and uncover those hidden weaknesses, that assumption will start to fall apart. For a long time, security has depended on being difficult. It has depended on difficulty. But this model seems to break that assumption. But again, a caveat, like I always say, it's for better, for worse. However, Anthropic doesn't think this is all that bad in the long term. Their view is that eventually systems will become more secure because if you can find vulnerabilities this quickly, you can also fix them faster and even prevent them before software ships. So over time, the idea is that the entire internet becomes more proof, but the problem becomes what happens in between. Because right now, both sides, the good and the bad, are getting access to better tools. defenders are getting stronger as much as attackers also are. And that creates a really unstable phase where things can break faster than it can be fixed. Which now leads us to the part where I give my take. Honestly, it gets a bit uncomfortable for me because we have already seen what happens when powerful tools becomes widely accessible. Not even on a serious level, just basic stuff. You can see it with AI slop and low quality content flooding the internet. So much that platforms like YouTube now have to actively tackle that at scale, and that is even on a lighter note, right? Now imagine something like this applied to security. We're talking about systems that banks rely on. We're talking about infrastructure that entire economies depend on. That is a different level of impact we don't want to mess with. So I don't really see this as a black and white situation because on one hand, yes, there is strong argument for making powerful tools widely accessible. But on the other hand, not everything should be open to all. Some systems are just too sensitive and the downside of misuse can be too high. Very high if care is not taken. So personally, I understand why something like this is being restricted, and I'll prefer for it to stay that way because once a capability like this is fully out there, you can't control what people, especially bad actors, get to do with it. And when it spirals out of control, what do? You can't take it back. So in all, I think when the stakes are this high, that's probably not a risk worth taking. But hey, what do you think about this? Should this kind of technology be open to everyone or should it stay within closed circle as is? Let me know what you think and see you in my next one.